Hey guys, Tyler here. So, a couple years ago, I uploaded a 3-part video series on my channel about Star Trek's Mirror Universe. In the first installment, I dove into the science of the Mirror Universe as a parallel quantum reality. Then, I dispelled what I believe are some misconceptions about the Mirror Universe's origins. Finally, I offered my own theory as to the potential origins of the Terran Empire. While these videos were generally well received, upon rewatch, let's just say that I can tell that my presentation has improved over the years. Nevertheless, while I may make more Mirror Universe videos in the future, I thought I'd collect this trilogy into a compilation video for you guys to enjoy. So, without further ado, here is the OrangeRiver 2021 Mirror Trilogy. Let's get started. Hey guys, Tyler here. For decades, the Star Trek franchise, in addition to exploring various sectors of our Milky Way galaxy, has occasionally given us glimpses of parallel universes and alternate timelines. This is a tradition that dates back to the original series and has only become more prevalent since the 2009 Star Trek movie. However, one of the most frequently, actually the most frequently visited parallel universes in Star Trek is the so-called Mirror Universe. First seen in the original series episode Mirror Mirror, this alternate reality's inhabitants possess more fascistic tendencies, at least among humans, with cooperation, freedom, and equality being viewed as dangerous fantasies that mirror humans, Terrans, abandoned millennia ago. The Terran Empire acts as a brutal counterpart to the United Federation of Planets. Imperial Starfleet officers are seen performing a sort of Roman salute, and much of the Empire's iconography is borrowed from the mythologized Roman tradition. While this initial outing cranked the campiness of the original series up to 11, later installments seemed to take the Mirror Universe more seriously, for better or worse. In episodes of Deep Space Nine, we see a few crossovers to the Mirror Universe 100 years later, where the Terran Empire has fallen to the Klingon-Cardassian alliance, inspiring a Terran rebellion, with Enterprise and Discovery adding even more information to the lore of the Mirror Universe, whose history is intricately intertwined with that of the Prime Universe. Many have attempted to pinpoint a divergence between the two universes' histories. One of the reasons for this is to figure out exactly where in the development of human civilization things went wrong, and Earth decided to go the route of conquest rather than peaceful exploration. I made a video years ago detailing an alternate history theory of mine regarding the Mirror Universe's origins, but with the recent additions in Discovery, I thought that it would be appropriate to explore more alternative ideas in this vein. In this video, I'll dive into the science used to justify the Mirror Universe's mere existence, dispelling myths along the way using evidence from canon and other sources. With that, let's get started. The explanation given in Mirror Mirror for the mechanism of travel to the Mirror Universe involves a transporter accident during an ion storm. This ionic activity is the same type of phenomenon that preceded the arrival of the Narada through a red matter singularity in the beginning of the 2009 Star Trek film. But specifically in regards to the Mirror Universe itself, its relationship with the Prime Universe is further explored in the Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly, in which the ISS Enterprise NX-01 crew retrieves the USS Defiant from Tholian space. The Defiant has been pulled through an interphase rift from 2268 of the Prime Universe, as seen in the original series episode The Tholian Web. Access to Defiant technology in the 22nd century gives Imperial Starfleet a leg up to accelerate their conquest of much of known space by the 23rd century. Alright, now, that may have sounded a little confusing given all of the time travel shenanigans and universe crossing involved, but just know this: access to more advanced technology, again, allows Terrans to accelerate their takeover of the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Anyway, this other, more dangerous method of crossing via a spatial interface tells us a little more about the relationship between the two realities. They mirror each other, naturally, even across centuries and down to the scale of individual people and ships having counterparts in both timelines. The universes are parallel and they sync periodically, often during times of intense conflict and preceding major alterations to the trajectory of both timelines. All of this is to say the mirror universe is not just some random quantum reality with a huge number of coincidences. No, the prime and mirror universes share a special link, seemingly as the moral antitheses of each other. Discovery deepens this connection by explaining the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network acts as a sort of highway connecting various parts of the multiverse. And on top of this, the prime and mirror universes' relative closeness to each other is tenuous and the connection can be severed. In fact, as we learned in Season 3, after the last crossing circa the 27th century, both universes have been drifting apart. Of course, the plausibility of any of this in real scientific terms is rather dubious. We hear terms like interphase and multiverse thrown around quite a bit. But what does modern physics actually tell us about the possibility of space beyond our observable universe? Well, as you can probably imagine, there are several mathematical theories that attempt to uncover the true nature of reality. One of the most well-known of these is the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which posits that all possible outcomes of an event manifest in different parallel universes. Developed by physicist Hugh Everett, the many worlds interpretation is intended to serve as a resolution to the so-called wave function collapse. In the Copenhagen interpretation, all outcomes of any given event exist in a superposition until one is observed, and this superposition, or wave function, ceases to exist. This gives rise to paradoxes, such as Schrödinger's cat. Is the cat alive or dead? Both, until it's not. But how can this be? Well, the many worlds hypothesis attempts to address this by stating that each universe has its own unique wave function, and theoretically there could be an infinite number of such universes. This theory is given stock in Star Trek, not only with the Next Generation episode Parallels, but also with characters waxing poetic about the infinite possible realities, a set that also includes the mirror universe, despite its unique attributes. Given that there are different types of infinity, it should still be noted that this doesn't mean that all possible universes actually exist, just that there are an infinite number of variations on our 4D familiar space-time. But where do all of these alternate realities actually physically exist relative to each other? Well, although the mycelial network mycelial network does sort of provide a connective tissue between the different universes, including the prime and mirror universes. As far as the geometry or the geography of the multiverse, no one really knows, not even Star Trek. There are, again, many mathematical theories that attempt to answer how different permutations of space-time interact with each other. One of these models is string theory, a framework of quantum field theory that posits that particles are actually made up of tiny strings, one-dimensional strings, that vibrate at different frequencies. String theory comes in many forms, all of which try to describe the four fundamental forces using quantum mechanics and abstract mathematics. In this way, string theory is referred to as a theory of everything, though disagreements exist on how much emphasis to put on certain elements like supersymmetry, which creates theoretical pairs of particles in order to explain cosmic inflation. Between this and the fact that, well, it's very hard to test or prove any of this with our current technology, no theory of everything has been declared. It is one of the big unsolved problems in physics. Anyway, string theory posits the existence of multiple spatial dimensions beyond our lowly 3. Variations of the theory suppose that there are up to 10, 11, even 12 different dimensions of space, many of which are compacted inside other dimensions at scales smaller than the Planck length, or
1.6 times 10 to the minus 35 meters.
This compactification would be of particular interest at the centers of black holes, for example, since Einstein's theory of general relativity cannot fully adequately explain such regions. An alternative model is the so-called brane world scenario, in which different dimensions are stacked on top of each other. In this model, our 4D spacetime exists on a membrane floating through what is called a bulk, and other membranes can float by us and sometimes collide, causing big bangs. Gravity would arise from strings propagating through this multidimensional bulk and intersecting our reality at a particular orientation, explaining why gravity is weaker than the other three fundamental forces. The prime and mirror universes could thus exist on branes floating within a multidimensional bulk. As for interface space, it could arise from a supersymmetric field that is quantum entangled in both realities, or alternatively, an analogous particle field that periodically phase shifts such that the barrier between the universes is thinner. Other models would suggest that the two universes might be cyclical repetitions of the same reality, with different choices being made in each timeline. Or they could exist in pockets of the same infinitely large inflationary universe. But I don't like either of these explanations as much as the possibilities that string theory offers, given the fact that so many Star Trek characters have doppelgangers in the other universe. What could be possibly causing these similarities to manifest? We know that the two universes are linked via the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network and intersected interface space. But that doesn't seem like enough. There could be something else going on. It's quite tempting to say that the mirror universe is some weird, twisted experiment by Q or another intelligent, powerful being. Perhaps it's part of his trial for humanity to test the limits of our barbarism, or perhaps the prime universe is the real experiment, with the Q trying to set us on a brighter path towards bettering ourselves. Of course, you could stretch this to its logical conclusion and say that all of the Star Trek universes are intelligently designed by creative forces, which, while obviously true in the real-world sense, is not as satisfying from an in-universe perspective. Obviously, we know that Q can create illusions, such as in, well, just any episode that he's in, basically. But as we learn in Voyager, the Q continuum is culturally stagnant. So if they were busy creating simulations of infinite possible realities, they'd probably never get bored. Instead, what we see is that they have done everything they believe they are capable or know they are capable of doing.
I traveled the road many times, sat on the porch, played the games, been the dog, everything. I was even the Scarecrow for a while.
Oh, we've all done the Scarecrow. Big deal.
And though the Q are definitely aware of possible futures, they can still be surprised, as we see on multiple occasions. They're not truly omnipotent. But enough about the Q. There could be yet another powerful force at work. In fact, while Gene Roddenberry's only involvement with the Mirror Universe was a rewrite of the Mirror Mirror script, he did have some interesting ideas that pertain to the relationship between different manifestations of space-time. One of these ideas has to do with the Traveler, a mysterious being who the Enterprise encounters in the 2360s. The Traveler, whose species is unnamed, is capable of altering space, time, and even warp fields at his will, and according to himself, does not come from the Prime Universe. He demonstrates his powerful abilities by whisking away the Enterprise D to the Triangulum Galaxy, and later to the end of the universe, whatever that means. But at this end of the universe, as depicted, thought and matter become one and the same. That's right, we're getting into some Doctor Strange territory. The universe is, in fact, powered by thought, according to the Traveler. This is actually what Gene Roddenberry believed, that the universe is more than what we can observe in our little bubble of space-time. We do know that in the Star Trek universe, thought can be powerful, And so perhaps the mirror universe is powered by the thoughts of its inhabitants. It's possible then that every universe has its own mirror reality, and in fact we see that the Kelvin timeline has its own mirror universe in an IDW Comics line. However, I don't think that this is essential, as it arguably cheapens the impact of the main mirror universe, to the extent that its sheer campiness doesn't already. Besides the special link that the two universes share, what about the point where their histories diverged? That's a question I'll attempt to answer in a future Star Trek video. Hey guys, I'm back. In a prior Star Trek video, I dove into the science of Star Trek's mirror universe, the twisted alternate reality first featured in the original series episode Mirror Mirror. In the mirror universe, the United Federation of Planets is replaced with a brutal counterpart, the Terran Empire, and the mirror universe's inhabitants are seemingly evil versions of their prime universe counterparts, sometimes cartoonishly so. Furthermore, the two universes seem to share a special link at the quantum level. What happens in one timeline affects the other. This special relationship causes historical events, ships, even people to mirror each other, even across centuries of history. So what is the point where the two universes' histories actually diverged? And what could have led humanity down a path of conquest rather than peaceful exploration? Today I'll examine some of the proposed answers to both of these questions. As we explore various theories as to when the two timelines separated, that is, prior to their drifting apart mentioned in Discovery Season 3, I think it's important to dispel what I believe are some misconceptions about the mirror universe and its origins and history. Misconception number 1. The mirror universe must have different physical constants. I think this is a huge misunderstanding as to how alternate realities ought to work in fiction. There have been some popular pieces of fan speculation floating around the internet, including on a certain website that starts with the letter R, that say things like, Terrans are aggressive because the speed of light is slower, leading to lower photosynthesis and more competition for food. There are a number of reasons that this is just kind of dumb. Firstly, changing the speed of light or any other physical constant would cause everything we know about the universe to just completely unravel. The nuclear binding energy that gives rise to fusion inside stars, the absorption of wavelengths on the electromagnetic spectrum. Now, Michael Burnham does make a big to-do in Discovery about the light feeling different in the mirror universe. The cosmos has lost its brilliance, she says, and it's stated that Terrans have one biological difference from prime universe humans, which is that they're more sensitive to bright light. This is implied to be an evolutionary change, possibly dating back millennia, but I'm not totally convinced. I think it's better, narratively speaking at least, for Terrans to just be regular humans who could have gone down a different path given different cultural circumstances. This adaptation could simply be a difference in preference, with statements of biological determinism and light being different, just being metaphors and exaggerations. But more on that later. Misconception number 2. The mirror universe is a timeline where Surak never influenced Vulcan history. Surak is, of course, a Vulcan philosopher from the 4th century AD who transformed his planet's culture by promoting logic and the suppressing of violent emotions. Surak dying as an infant is one difference featured in the Best of Trek fanzine issue number 14 as part of a conjectural history of the mirror universe, along with the augments winning the eugenics wars, which I'll talk about in a little bit. There's only one problem with this whole Surak dying thing. Mirror Vulcans on multiple occasions still frequently make references to logic and, for the most part, suppress their emotions. So, unfortunately, this one is just not correct. Misconception number 3. The mirror universe Bajorans were never visited by the prophets. The reason this misconception is thrown around is that because in the mirror universe episodes of Deep Space Nine, the Bajorans that we see are quite secular compared to their prime universe counterparts. This has raised questions as to whether the prophets even intervened at all in Bajoran history on the other side, or whether the orbs of Bajor even exist. But as Ronald D. Moore commented in a 1990 1997 AOL chat, quote, "The intention was that there were orbs on the other side, but they had been lost or destroyed or something, and they had passed into legend for the Bajorans." Mirror Garrick also makes a reference to Pa, the spiritual force inherent in all sentient life according to the Bajoran religion. And while the Bajoran wormhole hasn't been discovered in the Mirror Universe, as far as we know, it's almost certain, in my view, that the prophets still inhabit it. Also, we shouldn't really discount the possibility that the Bajorans became secular as a result of joining the Klingon-Cardassian alliance, as both of those species are explicitly atheistic. Speaking of religion, misconception number 4. Terrans must have never had the Abrahamic faiths to shape their civilization. This line of thought comes from the fact that in a deleted scene of the Enterprise episode In a Mirror Darkly, Jonathan Archer makes a reference to the gods, plural, and indeed the Terran Empire's Roman-inspired iconography could be indicative that these are the gods of the Greco-Roman classical pantheon. We know in the Star Trek universe the Greek gods were actually aliens from the planet Pollux 4. So it's interesting to consider in the Mirror universe if their visit might have included, say, an alternate outcome of the Trojan War, for example. As a matter of fact, references to classical literature in the non-canon novel Dark Mirror by Diane Duane, can you see that? It's Dark Mirror, indicate that the earliest difference between the two universes is the ending of the Iliad, in which Achilles kills Priam instead of showing him mercy. But as far as the Judeo-Christian heritage, removing it from Earth's history would completely reshape the course of Western civilization. And you might say that's the point, except no, not really. That's not really the point. The fact that we speak English, the names of towns and countries and people, of course, the Islamic golden age of science, too much would be too different if the Abrahamic faith had just never existed. The existence of Christianity, Judaism, and Islam is also foundational to the works of William Shakespeare, works which Mirror Flock's remarks are
equally grim in both universes.
The Bible is even among the other literature referenced in Dark Mirror, although we don't learn if it has any differences. Gene Roddenberry seems to have bought into the notion that Christianity led in large part to the downfall of the Roman Empire, a view popularized by historian Edward Gibbon and exemplified in the original series episode Bread and Circuses. However, most modern scholars, secular or otherwise, believe that this view is not accurate, or at least not the full picture. Which brings me to my next point. Misconception number 5. The Terran Empire must be a literal continuation of the Roman Empire. There are a number of reasons that this is unlikely. First off, all empires are bound to fall at some point. When the Western Roman Empire fell, it was just over 500 years old, but even if you include the fall of the Byzantine Empire in 1453, it's still less than 1,500 years, meaning that if the Terran Empire's true origins are indeed in 27 BC, then by the time of the original series, it would be over 2,200 years old. This is rather excessive. In fact, the average lifespan of an empire in Earth's history is only about 250 years. 250 years. When was the United States founded? Once again, an unbroken, continuous rule of Rome would overwrite the entire history of the world, basically, from ancient times to the Age of Sail to the Industrial Revolution and beyond. The fall of Rome was necessary for a lot of developments that are foundational to the world as we know it today. And given the number of people who have counterparts in both universes, I think it's likely that the Terran Empire is, as I mentioned earlier, borrowing iconography from Rome as opposed to being a literal continuation of Rome.
Slayer of Klingons, daughter of Rome.
Many empires have done this throughout history and in fact have declared themselves successor states of the original Rome. The Ottomans, the Holy Roman Empire from the 9th through 19th centuries AD, which was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, Mussolini's Italy, the list goes on. And I think the same applies to the Terrans. Misconception number 6. The Mirror Universe is a world where the European Age of Enlightenment never occurred. The truth is the Enlightenment is not really a singular movement founded by a handful of thought thought leaders. Rather, it's an amalgamation of different ideas that resulted from trends in preceding eras. From the days of antiquity to the Middle Ages to the Renaissance, the development of Western culture, influenced also by innovations from the Islamic world and other places, can trace its roots to seeds planted in the ancient world. Many of the ideas associated with the Enlightenment, liberty, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, separation of church and state, may strike us as being un-mirror universe-like given their positive attributes, but a closer look at the Enlightenment can help us make sense of this. Indeed, democracy itself was not one of the central tenets of Enlightenment philosophy, nor was true equality. In fact, Voltaire actually despised democracy. He believed that nations should be governed by a philosopher king whose decisions were based on logic and reason. And we know that Voltaire had quite an affinity for monarchs given all the time he spent with Frederick the Great, although not really like that, if you know what I mean. Even as rebellions against monarchies occurred in France and the Americas, for example, the result of these revolutions was not the sort of freedom and democracy that we're familiar with today. No, these revolutions produced republics that didn't have universal suffrage, and in the case of America, still practiced slavery for almost a century afterward. Even to this day, academics characterize the United States as being more of an oligarchy than a democracy. The Enlightenment, while it did popularize the scientific method and other progressive ideals, also produced scientific racism and colonialism and other evils. The selfishness that Terrans exhibit may actually be characterized as a hyper-individualist attitude rooted in an extreme reading of certain Enlightenment thinkers like John Locke. Even later developments like socialism and fascism also trace their ideological roots to the Enlightenment. And if the Terran Empire has always been fascist, as Michael Burnham describes, it cannot have been founded earlier than the 1930s. Speaking of fascism, misconception number 7, the mirror universe is a world where the Axis powers won World War II. There's really nothing to support this, honestly. The gist of this argument is that because the Terran Empire is fascist, it must be descended from a known fascist regime in real-world history, like Nazi Germany. Again, the problem with this is that in a Nazi victory scenario, there would be too many changes to global society that wouldn't even really mimic what we see in the mirror universe. Not to mention that, you know, the Nazis wanted to exterminate lots of non-Aryans. No one's speaking German, and don't make any witty comments about the universal translator. Some speculate that the mirror universe might actually be a timeline where Edith Keeler, the 1930s pacifist we meet in The City on the Edge of Forever, lived. In that episode, we see that if Keeler isn't killed in a car accident at a particular juncture in history, that she will go on to found a peace movement that keeps the United States out of World War II, leading to a Nazi takeover of the world. A grand demonstration of the moral imperative that fighting the Nazis entailed. But The City on the Edge of Forever already shows us the timeline where this happened, and in it, Starfleet just doesn't exist. Plus, even if it's a man in the high castle situation, the Nazis didn't hold on to power forever in that scenario either. Misconception number 8. The mirror universe is a world where Khan and the Augments won the eugenics wars. I'm including this one not so much because I don't think it could be true, but because there is a misconception that if Khan and the Augments won the eugenics wars, that everybody on Earth would become augments. This is just not true. And in fact, we've seen Terrans and Prime Universe humans fight. It's a relatively equal match, so I don't think that they are enhanced in any kind of way. Even if the augments did win the eugenics wars, really what that would entail is that they would have shaken up Earth's political scene, which is something that happened to a limited extent in the Prime Universe anyway. For more on this, see my video about Khan's empire. It's also possible that the eugenics wars just didn't happen in the mirror universe. They may have been influenced by events in the temporal Cold War, as suggested in Christopher L. Bennett's novel Watching the Clock. Speaking of historical events, in Star Trek history that involved time travel. Misconception number 9. The Prime and Mirror universes diverge at the point of first contact. Specifically, this misconception is based on the fact that in the cold open of In a Mirror Darkly, we see Zephram Cochrane greeting Vulcans who have landed in Bozeman, Montana, promptly followed by Cochrane pulling out a machine gun and shooting the landing party, after which the other people in his camp raid their ship. This is presented as a possible origin point for the Terran Empire's expansion to the stars. Some believe that the predestination paradox in the film Star Trek First Contact, in which the Enterprise E crew must convince Cochrane to still go through with his warp flight after a Borg attack on his complex, represents a point of divergence in and of itself. In the timeline where the Borg and the Enterprise didn't go back in time, the theory goes, a war-weary humanity would be more predisposed to act in a xenophobic manner towards any aliens landing on Earth, and our worst impulses would have taken over. The problem with this theory is that I don't like it. It presupposes that even in humanity's darkest hour, that the new era of peace and prosperity that First Contact ushered in couldn't have happened organically without a little nudge from our next generation heroes. It also doesn't address other claims of differences going back centuries or millennia, or any of the other predestination paradoxes and other time travel events that are littered throughout the history of the Prime timeline. This is another issue that we run into when discussing the timeline. Because of the nature of time travel, two universes that share a similar history up to a certain point might actually have been separated for far longer than it might initially seem. This is the case almost certainly with the Kelvin timeline. We see that Nero's ship emerges from a red matter singularity in 2233, meaning that it looks like the timeline splits in that year. However, given the fact that the Star Trek timeline is littered with so many bootstrap paradoxes that don't result in forking timelines, but rather represent events in the same continuous timeline, then the Kelvin timeline must have existed prior to 2233. This is actually the view that Simon Pegg endorses, and it makes a lot more sense, in my opinion, than the alternative. We only perceive cause preceding effect because of our limited three-dimensional thinking. This even leaves room for a potential Kelvin timeline mission to save the humpback whales. All of this is to say that almost certainly the Prime and Mirror universes didn't diverge at any single moment in history that we can point to. Thus, the Mirror universe has perhaps always existed separately from the Prime universe. Parallel, but never converging. Only at certain points does it come close enough to mimic the Prime universe, albeit through the reflection of a shattered mirror. And this mimicry evidently includes the birth of the same people in both timelines, even across centuries. Of course, realistically, the chances of the same people being born even to the same two parents in two parallel universes is astronomically low, meaning other sci-fi tropes like gender swapping are actually perhaps more plausible. But since the two universes do, as a matter of fact, share these connections, what could that mean for the Terran Empire's true origins? In the next video of this Mirror Universe miniseries, I present my own theory as to who really founded the Terran Empire. Hey guys, Tyler here. In prior Star Trek videos, I've explored various aspects of the Mirror Universe. First seen in the original series episode Mirror Mirror and featured in multiple episodes of Deep Space Nine and Enterprise and Discovery, the Mirror Universe is home to the Terran Empire, a brutal, xenophobic, fascistic counterpart to the United Federation of Planets. Mirror humans, Terrans, exhibit negative personality traits and ambitions that mirror the noble, peaceful, and diplomatic traits of their Prime Universe counterparts. In the first episode of this mini-series, I dove into the science of the Mirror Universe, using quantum field theory to analyze its relation with the Prime Universe. In the follow-up video, I dispelled what I believe are some misconceptions surrounding the Terran Empire's origins, that it's a literal continuation of Rome or a descendant of the Third Reich, that sort of thing. In this video, I'll argue for another alternative explanation that is admittedly just as speculative, but is intriguing to me nonetheless, that the Terran Empire began as a Mirror Universe version of the United States. Upon reflection of the nature of the mirror universe, it becomes clear that its historical differences could date back centuries or even millennia. This could explain how Terrans harbor more aggressive tendencies on the aggregate, but the specific history of their empire could have a more recent origin. Although the empire obviously exhibits callbacks to Roman iconography and the like, a personal favorite theory of mine is that the Terran Empire is an outgrowth of American imperialism. Now, before you go raging in the comments, just stick with me here. I know that putting American and imperialism in the same sentence can kind of set some people off, but hear me out. Once upon a time, there was a king named George Washington. I'm just kidding, Washington was never formally offered the chance to become a king, although some in the population at the time did entertain the idea of a constitutional monarchy. No, I think it's actually more interesting to consider what might have happened if America took a different turn later, say in the mid-20th century. Jonathan Archer claims in A Mirror Darkly that the Terran Empire is at least this old, although it could be older. But one could argue that the seeds for something like the Terran Empire were planted in the period between the world wars. If we do take claims about the empire's age at face value, then it must be descended from an Earth political unit that existed no later than the 1950s. This is supported by images seen in the alternate opening title sequence for In a Mirror Darkly, showcasing the history of human warfare. Included among these images is a Terran insignia superimposed over a clip of American soldiers marching into Paris, and a clip of an astronaut planting a Terran Empire flag on the moon. This latter image is shown chronologically between the launch of the Saturn V and the launch of the Phoenix in 2063. Curiously, the astronaut is wearing an EV suit that is identical to the ones worn by Starfleet officers in the 22nd century, meaning that either this was a later landing than 1969 or the VFX team used the same EV suit model for the title sequence because it was cheaper. Both could be true, but I tend to think that the latter is the overarching explanation. But how could this empire have arisen as a result of an Axis defeat in World War II? Well, as I've hinted at in this video, for centuries the US has engaged in what is euphemistically called world policing. The Monroe Doctrine, our rejection of European interference in the Western Hemisphere, followed by the Roosevelt Corollary, and our numerous land annexations have all laid the groundwork for the US to become a world hegemon. While some might think it's wrong to characterize America as an empire because we don't have a monarchy, think again. Remember, Rome was a republic after all, and so is France, which still has overseas holdings from its colonial empire, and so on. But the form of domination that the US and other Western countries have engaged in for the past half century or so usually takes on a more economic angle than anything else, than actually annexing territories and incorporating them into the United States. Think international corporations using their power and influence, often with the implicit or even explicit consent of their home governments, to buy exclusivity rights to mine minerals and other natural resources in poorer nations. This is a major component of modern free market capitalism. And the merging of corporations with the state, as Mussolini defined it, is fascism. There have been outright fascist movements in American history, although none of them really gained that much electoral traction. Without getting bogged down into today's politics, some of the most recent iterations of fascist plots against the federal government were often directed at the Roosevelt administration, including the failed so-called business plot in the 1930s, as well as Charles Lindbergh's America First movement. Okay, this is all well and good, but it's still kind of a vague picture. Indeed, for all of America's hegemonic practices, in the post-war era, many of its occupations of other countries led to those countries becoming independent liberal democracies. Now, it's sort of a different story today, with US interventions in places like Iraq or Afghanistan formerly, and various African countries, effectively becoming semi-permanent occupations, even if liberation from injustice is used as a pretext. This would work fine if we view the Terran Empire as an outgrowth of America's current imperialistic practices. But again, if we take the age of the Terran Empire at face value, then we have to go back to the 1950s. The US has a history of annexing and occupying foreign lands in the name of spreading Republican values. And as I discussed in my previous Mirror Universe video, what we call the Enlightenment could have still happened in the Mirror Universe, although with a different outcome. But regarding World War II specifically, during the war, the Allied powers actually bounced around different ideas for what a post-war New World Order would look like. The international order that we ended up with, the US spearheading the United Nations for diplomatic endeavors and NATO for defense against the Soviet Union, is still in place today. Some of this would still exist in the Mirror Universe. We know, once again, from the opening titles of In a Mirror Darkly, that something akin to the space race and the Cold War still occurred on the other side. But Tyler, I hear you screaming incessantly, what does this have to do with the Terran Empire? Why are we talking about the Cold War? I'm getting to that. I mentioned a phrase earlier, New World Order. These three words have been used in widely varying contexts throughout history, including by members of the Baha'i religion, Nazis, anti-fascists, science fiction writers, Pat Robertson. It's even on the United States dollar bill. It's a phrase that conspiracy theorists often latch onto, making connections with the Freemasons of yore, or various anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. But one work where the phrase is used in perhaps a more benign context is a map published by amateur artist Maurice Gomberg in 1942. Gomberg, a Polish-Jewish immigrant from Philadelphia, created the so-called outline of the post-war New World map as a personal project. Little is known about Gomberg, and beyond the shadow of a doubt, he almost certainly had no connections to anyone in the US government, or any government for that matter. The map depicts the world divided into multiple super-states, not dissimilar from those in George Orwell's 1984. The new borders include a US that has taken over the entire North American continent, united federations in Africa, Europe, and South America, a consolidated British Commonwealth, a greatly expanded USSR, quarantined Axis nations, and more. The map has, of course, been circulated online for many years and has been referenced by some conspiracy theorists as being indicative of serious plans for a reorganization of the world in the case of an Allied victory. But obviously, much of what's on this map did not come to pass. Many have noted that Gomberg's map is actually indicative of a sort of naive optimism about an Allied victory scenario, since the USSR was one of the Allied powers. But below the map's reimagining of the world's borders is a 41-point manifesto. Here we go. The manifesto, inspired in part by Franklin D. Roosevelt's For Freedom speech, calls for a number of radical changes, including the expulsion of all ethnically Japanese people from the United States. Yeah, I didn't say it wasn't racist, but the map, despite its exact configuration being sort of laughable, actually really laughable, did get me thinking. What if in the Mirror Universe, the United States actually did enact some sort of radical plan to bring about a new world order? If we assume that this alternate United States is more authoritarian to begin with, then there's a number of changes that we could see unfold over time. Perhaps FDR's reputation as a benevolent dictator in the Prime Universe takes on a more literal shape on the other side. Perhaps he's some sort of Julius Caesar type expansionist leader. He is, after all, commander-in-chief of the largest and most powerful military in the world. After winning the hearts and minds of those at home in the Republic with its New Deal reforms, the administration could take a more paternalistic approach to defense of the Western Hemisphere and continental Europe. This is the US that would have fewer qualms about semi-permanent occupations of places like the Caribbean, Greenland, Iceland, Germany, Japan, Korea, the Middle East, Indochina, and more. Lest you think this projection of military power abroad would make us safer, think again. Historically, many of our interventions have been less about spreading freedom and more so about protecting the interests of oil companies and defense contractors. This is not an anti-America rant, mind you, but this American empire, which is only shades different from America in real life, would have to compromise its morals in order to sustain itself. Whether the name Terran Empire is actually in use by the 1950s is completely irrelevant. The American empire would transform the world in its image. Any pretext about the Cold War being a fight to preserve liberal democracy could be shed entirely. It would center even more on the ideological battle between communism and capitalism, with proxy conflicts to control resources continuing even after the fall of the Soviet Union, if it still falls. The culture of this alternate American empire need not even really mimic that of the totalitarian regimes that we defeated in World War II. Indeed, as I mentioned in the previous Mirror Universe video, the Terran's selfishness could be seen as a hyper-individualist attitude rooted in an extreme reading of Enlightenment philosophy. One could imagine the empire's society being even more dominated by private interests than the real world is. This is not at all incompatible with the sort of fascism that characterizes the Terran Empire and is frankly emergent in the West today. The parallels are hard to ignore. People being stripped of their constitutional rights, the internet becoming increasingly controlled by cartels and monitored by government agencies, and education becoming more dominated by propaganda. All of this while the military conducts operations overseas in the name of anti-terrorism. Eventually, by the 2050s, this Western-dominated empire would defeat the econ and absorb those nations into its fold, eventually culminating in what we see in a Mirror Darkly and beyond. All of this is entirely speculative, of course. I'm only mentioning a lot of these connections because of what's suggested in the In a Mirror Darkly opening titles. But I think it's fun to imagine what might have happened if the post-World War II order spearheaded by the United States had taken a darker path, possibly with some encouragement from a more cynical outlook at the time of the nation's founding. With differences dating back centuries or even millennia, it's not easy to tell when and where the Prime and Mirror universes actually diverged. In fact, in my first video about the Mirror Universe, I basically came to the conclusion that they've likely always been separate, but due to some mechanism that links them cosmically, like the mycelial network.
The mycelial network is like
mycelial network! They reflect each other in mysterious ways, with many of the same people and places and ships having counterparts in both timelines. I do think it's more interesting to think of Terrans as being humans who have simply adapted to different cultural circumstances, rather than being a distinct species, as Discovery keeps trying to hint at, since the former means that any one of us could be Terrans should we be born in their universe. In this respect, I actually think that the Deep Space Nine crossover episodes are more interesting from a characterization standpoint. And while I think it's cool that Discovery has sort of added to the lore about the Mirror Universe, it's not as narratively satisfying, in my opinion. But what do you think? Let me know down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. I know I made some claims in this video, and I know that there are going to be political discussion in the comments section, so please keep it civil. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up down below and don't forget to share it. That stuff really helps me out. If you haven't subscribed yet, be sure to do that as well so you won't miss future uploads, and click the bell icon to receive all notifications. If you think I deserve it and you want to support the channel even further, becoming a patron or a member is a great way to do so. Links to those, as well as my social media and merch store, are in the description below. That's all I have for this week. Live long and prosper.